She thought this day would be like any other, a quiet drive out of the city, a first meeting with her parents, and a warm summer lunch under the shade of a tree. The morning began with a trace of nervous excitement, but nothing unusual. Every woman probably feels the same when she is about to meet the family of the man she hopes to marry. Everything appeared perfect at first. A neatly trimmed garden, the scent of fresh pies, polite smiles of welcome. But behind those smiles something else was lurking, something she could not yet name. And within just a few hours, what had seemed like a dream began to unravel into a quiet nightmare. Emily Parker was heading to the small town of Brooksville, where her Michael Harris had grown up. They had been together for over a year, and although she had seen photos and heard countless stories about his family, she had never met them in person. In the car, Michael casually mentioned that in his parents' home, everything was done according to certain rules. "Don't pick the fruit. Don't walk on the grass. Keep things in order," he said with a quick smile. Emily laughed, thinking it was nothing more than harmless old-fashioned manners. When the tall, wrought iron gates closed behind them with a slow metallic clang, Emily felt an odd sense of formality in the air. Michael's parents, Robert and Linda Harris, greeted her with polite reserve. Their words were kind, but their expressions seemed carefully measured, as if every gesture had been rehearsed. Robert shook her hand firmly. Linda kissed her on the cheek, with a practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes. They led her through a manicured garden, where every shrub seemed perfectly trimmed, and every flower bed looked like it had been designed for a magazine spread. Linda proudly pointed out the peach trees heavy with ripening fruit and the roses that lined the walkway. Emily complimented everything, but she couldn't help noticing how spotless, almost sterile, everything seemed. Lunch was served under a wide, ancient oak at the center of the backyard. The table was set with china, crystal glasses, and neatly folded cloth napkins. The conversation started politely, discussions about Brooksville's quiet charm, the family's long history in the area, and Robert's firm belief in proper upbringing. At first, Emily thought nothing of it, but her attention sharpened when the conversation turned to a neighbor's request for help. Linda recounted how a local widow had come by asking for a small favor only to be turned away. "People need to learn self-reliance," she said with a crisp tone, slicing a piece of pie. Michael nodded in agreement, and Robert merely shrugged. Emily kept her thoughts to herself, but the story left a faint, uneasy impression. They had just finished their meal when Robert suddenly excused himself, saying he needed to check something in the yard. Emily thought nothing of it until she heard a raised voice from beyond the oak tree, followed by the sound of hurried footsteps. Robert returned moments later, one hand gripping the arm of a thin, dusty boy of about 9 or 10. The child's clothes were worn, his hair a little unkempt, and in his free hand he clutched 2 small peaches. His wide eyes darted from face to face like a rabbit caught in the open. "This," Robert said, his voice sharp but oddly calm, "is what happens when you leave the gate open." Linda's brows knitted in controlled disapproval. "From the orchard?" she asked, her voice carrying more judgment than curiosity. The boy hesitated, glancing at the peaches in his hand, then gave the smallest of nods. Emily's heart sank, not at the fact that he had taken fruit, but at the sheer fear in his eyes. "Well," Linda said, "standing in this house, we believe in old-fashioned lessons." Michael stepped forward. "You know what happens now, don't you?" he said to the boy in a low, firm voice. He reached out and took him by the elbow, steering him toward the open space beside the oak. Robert was already unbuckling his belt. Emily froze. For a second, she wasn't sure she'd heard or seen correctly. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice sharp with disbelief. Michael looked over his shoulder as if the answer were obvious, teaching him not to steal. "This is how my father did it, and it works." Something inside Emily snapped. She pushed back her chair so abruptly it scraped against the stone patio. "No," she said, stepping between them. "This ends right here." Robert frowned. "Emily, it's none of your business. You're a guest in this house." "Then consider this my last visit," she said, her voice trembling but unyielding. "I will not be part of this family." She turned to Michael. For a moment, his expression was unreadable, a mixture of confusion, irritation, and perhaps a trace of shame. "Emily, you can't be serious," but she was already taking the boy's hand and leading him toward the gate. No one stopped her. The silence behind her was heavier than any shouted argument. Outside the Harris property, they walked along a quiet country road until the boy slowed. "You don't have to come any further," he mumbled. Emily crouched to meet his eyes. "What's your name?" "Ethan," he whispered. "Why did you take the peaches?" "Ethan?" He looked down at his scuffed sneakers. "My mom's sick. She hasn't eaten much in days. I thought maybe she'd like these." Emily felt her throat tighten. She placed the peaches gently back in his hands. "Go to her," she said softly, "and tell her there are still good people in the world." He nodded and ran off, disappearing into the sunlit dust of the road. By the time Emily reached her apartment in the city, the day felt like a lifetime. She set down her bag, walked straight to her mother's kitchen, and without a word, wrapped her arms around her. Her mother, startled, asked no questions. She simply held her daughter close. In the days that followed, Michael called, sent messages, and even showed up at her door, trying to explain. He said she had overreacted, that discipline was part of life, that his parents meant no real harm. Emily listened once, then closed the door. She never replied again. She knew people would talk. In a small town like Brooksville, news traveled fast, and the story would grow with each telling. Some would call her dramatic, others ungrateful. But she didn't care. What mattered was the moment under the oak tree, the moment she realized that kindness was not in Michael S. nature, nor in the home where he was raised. Years later, when someone asked why she had never married, Emily would sometimes smile faintly and say, "Because I met the right boy at the wrong house." But the truth was simpler and sharper. She had walked away because some things, once seen, could never be unseen.